Okay, so in my endless quest to analyze all of my data, the next thing I started analyzing was trips that I've been on. So I've been on about 96 trips in my life, and that includes like flying places, road trips, basically any time I went to a location that was not where I was living at the time. I've done that 96 times in my life that I can remember. Um, so I had it all in a Notion table. I exported it, and I ended up with a CSV. And one of the columns was a people column. Now, this people column is the people that I went on that trip with. Now, these aren't the actual people. I've changed the names, but yeah, I ended up with this people column, and these were the types of values that I ended up with. Now, there were some rows that had a null value, so those were trips that I went on alone. There were some that had like a single string. They were all string. If they had a value, it was a string. There was somewhere it was like Alice. Lucy says I went on a trip with Alice. This one I went on a trip with Lucy. It was just me and them. But then there were rows like this one where I went on a trip with multiple people, with two people, and it ended up being a comma delimited list. Um, so what I wanted to do was I wanted to take the CSV, so it was a trip CSV, and on that were the flights and the hotel and like all types of other stuff. But I wanted to break that CSV up, and one of the ways I wanted to do that was I wanted to create relationships. I wanted to break the data apart in the CSV, create separate tables in a SQLite database, and then create relations between them. And then I'd be able to do some like cool analysis of the trips that I've been on. But in creating the people table, I would have to normalize these values, right? Because otherwise, if I just take this and I like turn this into a data frame and then turn it into a CSV and just dump it in there, I'm going to end up with a row that is Charlotte, comma Mike, instead of ending up with a Charlotte row and a Mike row, right? And then I wouldn't be able to do these multi-row relations to a single trip. So I had never really used pandas before, and I did a very naive approach. So I'm going to show my very naive approach first and explain why it's bad, and then I'm going to show the much better approach. So the first thing I did was I used pandas to read the CSV and then turned it into a data frame. So I wrote the data frame by hand here, so I don't have to show like loading the CSV. But I loaded the CSV into a data frame. I ended up with a data frame that looks like this. So you have none, and this would be representative of this like null value. It's like I went on the trip alone. Then you have these values just like they are here: Alice, Bob, Lucy, and then like a string here, which is a comma delimited list, right? So if we look at this, we end up with that, right? So we have our indexes here and we have our values. This is a string value. So the first thing I thought was like, all right, this is cool, but I can't have this. I need to like split it apart. So I was like, okay, well I can go to the name, then I could just split by comma space, right? Because that's how they all look, right? There's only 96 values. I looked at the CSV. I know what the data looks like. I don't need to accommodate for like random values in this case. So I did that, and then I got these values, and I was like, okay, that's a good step in the right direction. But this isn't great, obviously, right? What I really want is I want singular values on each row, right? I want this to be none, Alice, Bob, Charlotte, and then another row, Mike. So again, I had never used pandas before, so I did a very naive approach. So I was like, all right, well, I'll just iterate through every single row. And then if on the rows where there's more than two values, then I'll split them up, right? So that's what I'm doing here. I go through if the names is not none, so like ignore this value. I don't really care about that. If the length of the value in the name column is more than one, so this is just one, this is just one, this is two. So I want to take the first value, so name 0 would be Charlotte in this case. At the index, which is going to be 3, assign Charlotte to that row, right? So the first time I did this, I was like, I did that. And when I tried to run the next line, which is adding a new row with Mike, it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is because anytime you do something with a pandas data frame, it edits the data frame in place, which is why this type of implementation is not a good implementation. But again, I never used pandas, so I had no idea. So that's why I ended up having to like copy. I don't call row name here, because if I did, row name 1 would no longer exist because I removed it here, right? So I would have to do row name 0, and then here would be row name 0 because it moved, right? Actually, at this point, Mike would be completely blown away because I eliminated the value, right? So like by doing this, I'm eliminating Mike if I didn't use this copy approach. So basically, I'm just creating a copy of this, and then I'll use the copy to set the values. And this makes it so that I can edit the data frame without getting the values from the data frame, right? So yeah, I set the index 3 to Charlotte's, and then I set the next row, which would be the length of people, which is 4. So I set that 4, this like empty row, imagine an empty row here. I set that to Mike, right? And if it's not greater than 1, like these, just assign the value to whatever the first element of the array is, right? Because I don't want these values to be arrays. I want them to be strings, right? So if I run this, then boom, I get kind of what I wanted. Now, this is a very naive approach. So really what you want to do is that you want to use built-in pandas methods, because obviously the people who work on pandas, they've already thought of everything, and their approaches are much better. So all of this is pretty much the same, right? I have my data frame here. I'm splitting by the string. But now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to normalize my values, right? So I had that like none value there. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to apply it to the name column. I'm going to normalize the values. So if X is none, then return an empty array, else just return the array. Then instead of doing the iterative approach, I can use the pandas explode method. So the explode method does exactly what I was doing here, but it does it in a way more efficient way. Also, this method is inefficient because, like I said, I've seen the data. There's only 96 rows, and I know that the values are either none, 1 value, or 2 values. I've never been on a trip with more than 2 people, so this is the max. That's all I accommodated for. But if I had gone on a trip with like 5 people, 7 people, 4 people, whatever, this approach wouldn't work. So explode does what I was doing, and it handles however many values. So basically what it does is that it looks at the value that's in the row, determines whether or not it's a list, and if it is a list, explode the values out of the array, and then assign each value besides the first one to a new row. So it does the whole thing that I was doing by hand. It does it for me in a way more efficient way. Then as I had here, I have this like none value. Obviously I don't want that. So this drop NA removes the none values. The next thing that I didn't accommodate for in my own code, but pandas has, is drop duplicates, right? So if I had gone on multiple trips with Charlotte, I wouldn't want multiple rows of Charlotte in my people table. I only want 1. So drop all the duplicates, and then there you go. And then I end up with much more of what I wanted. Alice, Bob, Charlotte, Mike, all on separate rows. Boom.